Right, I think it's time. So I will call the meeting to order at 6:01. This is the special meeting of the Environment, Infrastructure, Transportation Policies Committee, which reports directly to Council. Madam Clerk, like I was just saying, our regular meeting is usually on a Tuesday, I believe the second Tuesday of each month, of every other month. So maybe you could tell us why we're meeting Monday, January 11th.
Yes, Mr. Chair. There was a request from staff that this committee meet this evening in order to discuss the two reports that are on the agenda this evening. Both of them deal with funding matters that are required to be before Council prior to February. By having the meeting this evening, the decisions tonight will be on the agenda for Council on January 19th.
Great. So I take from what you said that because we've got budget deliberations at the end of this month, we couldn't, that's one of the reasons we couldn't wait till the February meeting. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct, Mr. Chair. However, staff will be able to speak to it when they are addressing the business item.
And Councillor Holland. Okay, everybody's here. Amazing. Well done. Councillor Holland, I've just called the meeting to order, and the clerk has clarified the reason for the special meeting. It's so that we can deal with two time-sensitive matters that have budgetary considerations prior to the budget deliberations at the end of the month. So there's just two items on the agenda. You'll see them in the package. Both are accompanied by a briefing. So we need a mover and a seconder for the agenda as printed. Moved by Councillor Ostroff, second by Councillor Neal. So in the past, Madam Clerk, we have had the briefing accompany each business item. So we'd go briefing A, business item A, and then briefing B, business item B. Is that what is envisioned here? Because that's not the order that's in the agenda.
Mr. Chair, it's up to the committee how they wish to receive the items this evening. If it is better for the committee that they listen to a briefing and then deal with the business item and then return to the second briefing and then the following business item, that is permissible if the committee wishes to do so.
That would be my preference, but I'll put it to a vote. So I guess I'll need a seconder. I move, so that I guess I give the chair up to the vice chair so that I can make a motion to alter the agenda. So go ahead.
Thank you. I recognize Councillor Stroud to move an amendment to the agenda.
Thank you. So I guess I would move that we have briefing, the order be as follows: briefing, so 6A and then 7A and then 6B and then 7B. That is my motion. And
seconded by Councillor Sanik. Any debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll return the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Excellent. Any other proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, there is just the two business items. So then we will confirm the agenda by vote. All those in favor of the altered agenda? Please vote. Thank you. All in favor? None opposed? Now we have the confirmation of minutes. Madam Clerk, would that just be our last meeting of EITP?
Mr. Chair, this is a special meeting. We don't particularly put the minutes from the last meeting. Both the minutes from December 8th meeting and the minutes from this special meeting will be addressed in February's meeting of EITP.
Okay, great. So no minutes to confirm. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest for members of the committee? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, do we have any delegations?
No, Mr. Chair, we do not.
And I'm just scanning the list of participants. Madam Clerk, is there a way to tell which are members of staff and which are members of the public?
Yes, Mr. Chair. If we have members of public, they would be under the attendees section under the participants panel. So we have panelists are typically staff or those who have organized to make a presentation to the committee, and the attendees are typically the members of the public who have registered to be a part of this evening's meeting. At this time, there doesn't appear to be any of the members public here with us this evening. However, I do see that Ms. Salter-Keene does have her hand raised at this time. Perhaps, I'm not sure if she is wishing to speak to anyone who is wishing to address the committee this evening.
Go ahead, Ms. Salter-Keene.
Through you, Chairperson, I just wanted to introduce Dave Rowade before he started the briefing. I don't believe many committee members have met him since he's been with the City of Kingston. So before he started the briefing, I wanted to introduce him.
Okay, so let's go right to there, seeing as we have no delegations. So briefing 6A, and I'll go back to Ms. Salter-Keene to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Stroud. So I would like to introduce Dave Rowade this evening. He is with the Climate Leadership Division. He works with me. He's a project manager, and we have been working on the development of both of these programs that you'll be presented to tonight. And with that, I will pass it over to Dave.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Well, I guess we're getting the slideshow up on screen. Great, thank you. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. So over the next 10 minutes, this is what we are presenting today, the major design influences on the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program, the program goals, objectives, target markets, as well as some of the design features and intended outcomes. We'll focus a bit on the financing mechanism as is a part of one of the recommendations before you today, as well as some of the high-level estimated program costs as it relates to the city's upcoming budget process. Outline some of the potential stakeholder roles, and then finish with the next steps. And then Julie and I will both be available to answer any questions and take any further feedback. Next slide, please. Seems to be a bit of a delay in the next slide. There we go. Okay, so there are 5 major influences on this program. One of them, of course, is the corporate strategic plan, which under the climate leadership theme has an action that directs staff to develop an energy retrofit program that targets high capital cost items that also have high carbon reduction impact potential for property owners. One of the next major influences is the FCM's Community Energy Efficiency Financing Program, which is a critical resource for Canadian municipalities to develop and launch and operate home retrofit programs for up to 4 years. Therefore, the eligibility requirements outlined by FCM have influenced many aspects of CERP's design, such as the type of housing, financing mechanisms, and the utilization of the EnerGuide auditing framework used to assess a home's energy usage and identify opportunities for improvement. Staff have also conducted a local survey, conducted various stakeholder consultation, as well as reviewed lesson learned from other communities that have experience in implementing these types of programs. Of course, we also, the legal premise for municipality to use the LIC mechanism for improvements on private property under the Municipal Act influenced this. And then the final point on the slide is staff recognize that this program should and will contribute to the local economic recovery imperative faced with us today. Next slide, please. So what we have before you are the goals and objectives of the program. I'm going to assume you can read them clearly and not repeat them, but what I will do is say that this goal is a SMART goal. It's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. In no way is it including any numbers that are required by the FCM. These are self-imposed, ambitious, aspirational outlines or parameters of the project. The objectives really speak to how that goal will be achieved. And the first one, you can see the direct link with the city's corporate strategic plan, as I just spoken to. The objectives number 2 and 3 really speak to what we need to include in this program for it to be a success. So to engage homeowners to participate and make these investments in retrofits, and what kind of provisions we have to provide in the program in terms of expertise, financing, incentives to enable them to do that. And that last objective really speaks to that need for, this has got to stimulate local investment, job creation, and increase the disposable income of residents through reduced utility costs. Next slide, please. The primary and secondary research that we conducted identified 5 target markets. Again, I'm not going to speak to each individual one in interest of time. I will point out to you that that first one is not an eligibility requirement. However, it is making reference to the Ontario Building Code standards at that time and before 1991 that affected energy efficiency within a home. So they were much lower back then, and they will have the best opportunities for a big impact from this program. I'm happy to address any other questions pertaining to these other markets in the question and answer period. Next slide, please. So let's move to the summary of the program design. So moving through these pieces of the pyramid, the program offers flexible sources of financing at favorable rates and financial incentives for energy efficiency improvements at home that achieve deep GHG reductions. This addresses the noted barriers we found in the research on upfront cost and project payback. The use of detailed marketing information and housing energy analysis helped us identify and target market segments to achieve the highest program uptake. This enables us as program administrators to effectively use the program resources and the marketing strategy. The various decision support tools such as home energy audits, access to an energy coach, and mobile apps help homeowners make informed decisions on the most impactful retrofits suitable for their particular house and budget. And the energy coach really shepherds that homeowner through the entire retrofit process. This addresses the lack of knowledge and understanding of retrofit opportunities that the survey in particular identified is prevalent. Technical services also includes training for direct service contractors to ensure they are equipped with the most current facts on opportunities. And then finally, the top piece, program promotion and customer engagement through the utilities and channel partners includes contractors and auditors for implementation for a multi-layered marketing strategy to optimize success. This will also improve homeowner participation levels. Next slide, please. So looking at the short-term and long-term expected impacts and outcomes, we've separated them out to the period that could potentially be funded by the FCM program, which is a 4-year program. So we've made some estimates on how many number of homes could be realistically retrofitted. The number of jobs created is based on the estimated amount of loans during that period using a multiplier of $1 million for every, 16 to 30 jobs for every $1 million invested. And then the estimate on cost savings each year per household. The long-term focuses on the greenhouse gas reduction impact over a period where the program's been allowed to be scaled up. And the last point is important because what we're really doing is helping develop a sustained local retrofit market that's led by third-party financing and program delivery. So we're momentum builders in the short term. Next slide, please. So there's 3 financing mechanisms that we're proposing to be included in this program. However, for this briefing, I will focus on the first as it relates to the recommendation before you. The LIC financing is the primary focus of the initial years of the program implementation and is a big part of the FCM funding model. The long-term goal of CURP will be to transition to third-party financing through utility providers and financial institutions because involving private capital investment has been shown, particularly in communities where these programs have been around quite some time, that it's critical for mass scale up. So this is why we're working with community partners such as credit unions and the local utilities to offer all three options for maximum flexibility early on, depending on the homeowner situation, scale of project, to get their feet wet and get them involved with the eventual desire to have them continue on past the FCM funding. A bit on the LIC loans, these are attached to the property and not the owner. They can have a much longer repayment term and lower interest than conventional forms of borrowing, such as line of credits with banks. Repayment is arranged as an addition to individual property tax payments, and the benefit of this is twofold. It can assist homeowners with accessing capital for high upfront costs of retrofits. And two, it enables the transfer of the lien to a new owner in cases where the loan applicant wants to sell their house before the LIC is repaid in full. The latter is particularly useful where the retrofits have a long-term payback period. I had also mentioned that 5 to 10% of the FCM funds can be used towards a loan loss reserve to lower the risk of all three options. Next slide, please. If you could just click 3 more times, please. I think the bullets have animation. Whoops. There we go. So I'm only going to speak really to the first one as it relates directly with the FCM funding program that's currently or will be available as of February 1st. This is where they have defined that this is only suitable for one-family dwellings, so not multi-residential. This is something we want to look at later on beyond this funding, but for the purposes of this program, the loan and grants money are to be used for one-family dwellings. The rest are really associated with the LIC legislation and the best practices by other communities. Again, happy to dive into this more as needed by members of the committee. Next slide, please. So this is a high-level estimate, aggregated estimate of the program cost over 5 years. It assumes 500 homes, averaging $25,000 loan per home, which is what Toronto experienced over a 5-year period. And again, this is a loan on the cost of the retrofit. And this would be having this program budget approved is a prerequisite to applying to the FCMCEF program. So we're recommending approval of the full $18.5 million capital plan in the 2021 budget to be managed over the 4 years of CURP implementation. This is a very positive leveraging ratio because 14.8 million of the 18.5 is conditional on the funding from FCM, and the remaining 3.7 million in loans and grants would be the city's portion over the 4 years. This is a 4-to-1 leveraging ratio. Loans will be repayable with interest over a 10 to 20 year period from both the homeowner to the city for the eligible retrofit projects and from the city to FCM for their proportional contribution to program financing. Accessing this funding with the city's leverage contributions will enable staff to develop program awareness and momentum, which will further enable us to attract key partners and third-party investment for long-term scale-up. Next slide, please. So I'm going to summarize this slide by saying that City of Kingston is playing the role of program administrator, leading from behind and ensuring the LIC loans and repayment are processed accordingly. And we obviously have some monitoring and reporting responsibilities, both to council and to FCM as the funder. The utilities are recognized as key program delivery and promotional partners in conjunction with the energy coach to reach the homeowners and help them make informed decisions. The trade and channel partners are the contractors, energy auditors, training institutions, and home improvement retailers that help us promote the program as well as provide direct retrofit services and products to the homeowners. And for my last slide, the next one, I'll finish on next steps as it relates to the recommendations before you. So we are presenting the prerequisites that are would be needed prior to applying to the FCM funding program, and that is the design study in Exhibit A, the LIC bylaw in Exhibit B, and the summary of the estimated program budget, which is in the report before you. We recognize that once the budget process has concluded towards the end of February, and if our budget request is included, we are then in a position to apply to the FCM program. And then following notice on our application, we would be able to establish partnerships and service agreements after we come back to you with the final program design and recommendation for those details, with the hope we're launching by the last quarter of this year. And with that, as I said, Julia and I are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I have to say that all again. Questions only for members of staff regarding the briefing. If you have questions about the recommendation, or if you have comments or anything debatable, that you'll have to wait till we get to business. So questions only on the briefing. Councillor Neal.
Mr. Chair, I just have an important question for the chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Osram.
Okay, in my preparations this afternoon, I didn't see anything with electrical on there. I read electrical. I don't know if anyone thinks I should declare a pecuniary interest. I don't think I should. If we're fixing roads, we all drive cars, but I don't see it, but I just noticed it, so I wanted to ask. But if someone feels that as a contractor, I shouldn't be part of the conversation.
Well, Councillor Osterhoff, what I can say as chair, when this has come up in the past, with something this widespread, is that we're all citizens of the city, and most of us are property owners. You know, it would apply, if you declared, it would apply to pretty much everyone. So your
thank you, Mr. Chair.
occupation.
Just wanted to say it. I don't see it as either, and I just happened to notice that one line in there. So thank you.
Yeah, that being said, it is your decision, but there's my own opinion of that.
I do have a question and comment, but I see Councillor Neal is first.
Okay, so go ahead, Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. The coach, the energy coach that you mentioned, is that something that you see as potentially being done in-house between city staff and utility staff, or is that something that would be a contracted out kind of situation?
Mr. Verwait.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Neal, that would be a fully funded position with the FCM monies. It's yet to be determined where the ideal place where they would reside as an employee. It could be with the city, it could be with one of the utilities, it could be with a nonprofit. All three of those have been practiced in Canada, and we expect that to be a part of conversations and negotiations over the following months. So sorry, I don't have a more conclusive.
No, that's fine. That's a thoughtful answer. Thank you.
Ms. Salter-King.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, just to add on to what David said, in addition to looking at that and evaluating where the best position would be for the energy coach, if we are successful with our budget and then the funding through FCM, when we come back to EITP with the final details, that would be all laid out in that report to the committee as well.
Thank you. Mr. Neal.
My next question, I believe, having read the report and watched your presentation, I'm assuming that multi-residential housing will not be included in this at this time for this kind of assistance, but say a not-for-profit co-op or something like that, that isn't individual home ownership, but it is a not-for-profit housing situation. Would those be eligible? Is that something that we've given some thought to?
Mr. Verwait.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's a good question, Councillor Neal. The guidance we got from FCM is that it's not so much the ownership, because to clarify, somebody renting a house could be eligible, but the owner of the house has to consent to the improvement and taking on the lien. So it's more a question of, is it a 3 stories or less? So what's called a one family, or it used to be called a single family home. Multi-residential aren't eligible, largely to do with something to do with the building code and the use of the federal EnerGuide audit. The EnerGuide audit is only suitable for single family homes. Multi-residential, much more complex systems. You don't have a furnace in each unit, you have a giant boiler in the basement. You also would need much more resources to do multi-residential buildings. It is definitely something we want to explore in the future. It's just not eligible for this funding.
I appreciate that, and I'm glad it isn't multi-residential, quite frankly, but I have been engaged over the years with co-ops, which are not for profit, and it's a co-op board, even though there are individual family units. And so I'm presuming that with a motion from the co-op board, they would indeed be eligible. If you don't have an immediate answer, if you could look into that, that would be great.
Mr. Rowade.
Mr. Chair, if they are row housing, they are eligible. If they are an apartment building of more than 3 stories, so 4 stories or more, they wouldn't be eligible.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Chief Hugenboss.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Councillor Stroud. And just to add to that, and thanks, Dave, those are great responses for Councillor Neal. I think we can definitely take that away, because I am maybe perhaps more familiar with the co-op that you might be speaking of, or the co-op model here, Councillor Neal. And there are a lot of single family or one family residences in that model. So that's something we can definitely take away. And I think you've heard that loud and clear here from Mr. Rowade. So absolutely, we'll take a look at that for sure.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Osterhoff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that presentation, Mr. Rowade, and Miss Keene, sorry. Excellent. I spent some time on it this afternoon. I'm very impressed with it. I think this is going to be big. I think this should be really, really well received. I mean, it does resonate. I mean, you know, I'm not that old, but I remember the Get Off Oil program, believe it or not, from 1980. There you go. When I first got involved in the trades, you know, so, but this is what, a couple of things I'm just, maybe you said it and maybe not, so it doesn't hurt to review it. FCM is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Yes. I'm not sure we defined that. What's the total funds available? Is this a massive fund from Ontario, or where's the funding coming from?
Go ahead, Mr. Rowade.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So it is a national program. It was in the federal budget, I believe, 2 years ago. The monies were passed on to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. I believe $300 million was the total amount nationally. It will be dispersed over a period of about 5 or 6 years. And so I don't know what their formula is by province, but individual municipalities can apply to up to $10 million in loans and $5 million in grants. So we're just about maxing out that with our expected budget.
Okay, sorry, I didn't know. It's obviously administration of this. I kind of see what you're doing. I think it works good for. I like it. I just don't. I hope that we can keep it as simple as possible, so administratively it doesn't become a burden. And I'm sure is that something we Kingston's going to look after? Is that we have the capability of doing that? Of course, I guess.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So the way the program we are looking at, and we've been reaching out and working quite thoroughly with Utilities Kingston and Hydro One and Enbridge, all our utility providers in the city, and we'll be working with them with the securing of the funding from FCM. We would then work and provide agreements that would be brought back again to this committee, looking at which utility providers would be providing that service. With respect to the energy coach, again, we would look at how best to implement that. And the city then would maintain the administrative component, the marketing component. Certainly with the LIC, we'd have to maintain that administrative detail. but certainly the full details of how the administration of the program and the implementation of the program would then be brought back to the committee with the securing of funds.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I have a couple of comments on that, but maybe later. As a rural councillor representing the rural district, of course, there's a bit of a disconnect there between UK and countryside. There is some areas that they are familiar with, so I guess I'm just asking for reassurance that there will be efforts made to make sure there's not excluding the actual area that UK is not not necessarily has not ventured in.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. That's why we have been partnering and communicating with all of the utility providers, utilities, Kingston, Hydron, because we recognize that the best ones to deliver to the programs would be the ones that are delivering to their stakeholders. So if it's in the rural area or within the area of Hydro One, that would be one of the service providers.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I might have missed that part. So just in getting to the meat and potatoes of it, like maybe I missed that too, and I apologize, but we're talking the basics of every home's envelope, the windows, the doors, insulation. Will there be a checklist? I mean, how is that? How will that? Is that going to be fleshed out yet? How that will be done? What's included in it all?
Mr. Rowett.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So fortunately, there's a well-established process, and it's Natural Resources Canada EnerGuide auditing framework. So a registered energy advisor goes in before the retrofit and does what's called a blower door test, and they look at the current energy use of the home. They take note of some of the major equipment such as space and water heating, and then you get this energy rating as well as a GHG number. Within that, the building envelope is included. If I could ask for either Elizabeth or IT to put up slide 26, I could actually show you some of the details, but we look at insulation, windows, doors, the heating equipment, the how the hot water is heated. And so this is a grouping or an archetype that represents probably the best opportunity.
So sorry. Yeah.
So it's at the back of the exhibit A. So you can see on the right, this is the type of thing that will be identified, you know, the floor area and the year built, but moreover, the type of heating, what's its efficiency level? Does it have a heat pump? How is the hot water heated up? What's that efficiency? That you can see those insulation levels, those are really low. You want higher RSI values. And then right at the bottom, you have an air tightness value. That one you want really low. That's how many air exchanges within an hour. So it is looking at the whole home as a system, and that's how you're going to optimize the retrofits, the benefit to the homeowner, and our use of the resources. So sorry for the long protracted answer.
No, thank you. That resonates and all very familiar. That has been happening too. I mean, over the years, there's been that same EnerGuide retrofit has been going on in other programs. So that's I have heard of this and I'm familiar somewhat with that. So that's great. And okay, that's good. Thank you very much. No more questions at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Strauss. Before we move to the next Councilor, which would be Councilor Holland, I just wanted to clarify. I didn't catch the name of the test that you say that the audit is called. What is the name of the test?
It's the EnerGuide rating.
You said another word.
EnerGuide rating system.
EnerGuide rating system. Is that an acronym? Is there an acronym for that?
ERS.
I think that might be what you said. Okay. I just wanted to, when in your answer, you said something I didn't quite catch. That's all.
Oh, I mentioned a registered energy advisor. That's somebody who conducts the EnerGuide audit. Yeah.
So to sum up how it works is it's different for each home depending on what the auditor finds.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, Councilor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just one question about the in the supply side of producing the equipment and installing and all of those things. The report does mention additional stakeholders and potential to engage with contractors about I guess their role in all of this. Once upon a time in a different role, I spoke to quite a number of people who were in specifically the area of newer technology and newer green technology, who were not investing in those businesses and felt they couldn't continue on because government programs seemed to come and go. And so I'm wondering, with the engagement with stakeholders potentially who are looking at maybe different types of heating, solar heating, that kind of thing, those smaller green energy tech people, if there are, when the report mentions and the presentation refers to increasing jobs, et cetera, and just any kind of snapshot that you might have on whether those jobs exist currently and who we would be speaking with and encouraging to invest in their own businesses to be able to support this program.
Mr. Rowe.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. That's a very good question. And we have already started talking to some of the trade channels, the utilities, all of them, utilities, Kingston and Enbridge Gas and Hydro One have been very cooperative with connecting us with their contractor networks that operate in this area. We've started to speak to some. We will be actually holding another consultation after council later in the month to dive a little deeper. This has come up in many communities, unfortunately, with this national funding that actually started over a year ago. Many municipalities are developing this program, and many are talking to industry and trade associations. So a lot of us are already telling them, we're going to have a lot of work for you. So the short answer is there are already some positions, but we will need more, which encourages the trade associations, which encourages the existing businesses because they see more work to come. But that's also why we're talking with St. Lawrence College. They have an an engineering systems and environmental design program that trains people to do trades and energy audits. And we have let them know we're going to need more people trained. So that's why in the early years, it'll be a slow ramp up. Some communities are really proposing something like 2,000 audits a year. And from what I understand from the trades community, that capacity isn't there yet. It'll take us a few years to get up to that. So the short answer is there's jobs there. The good news is there will be more jobs in a few years' time.
Is that it, Councillor Holland? Okay, Councillor Doherty, you're up next.
Thank you, and through you. Thanks for the presentation and the really well-written and in-depth report. It was really interesting reading, and I really appreciated the examples of the type of homeowner and the type of homes was really well done. Just a few questions, and I might as well ask the one that kind of is related to the job creation. I just wonder, how did you come up with the calculation, like the formula to calculate that we would have that many jobs per whatever million?
Mr. Rowe, go ahead.
So through you, Mr. Chair, that actually comes from a report that came out just last September, Bridge to the Future, final report from the Task Force for a Resilient Recovery. So they use a multiplier of 16 to 30 jobs for every $1 million spent on retrofitting. And that includes both direct labor and trades for the HVAC personnel, as well as some of the indirect jobs it creates by increased demand for products and materials. Insulation sales are going to go up over the years with these programs being proliferated. So it was a formula established within that national research report.
Which they established because of past programs, I guess. It's through experience, I guess. Yeah. Thanks. So a couple other more questions. The example you gave is homes heated with gas, fossil fuel, and you mentioned gas. will you be looking at homes heated with oil as well?
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So there's 4 major types of heating systems within Kingston. Predominantly it's natural gas, but there's surprisingly quite a number of oil and propane heated homes, and we'll be definitely looking at them. They actually represent the best opportunity from both a greenhouse gas reduction perspective and a cost saving perspective of the homeowner. Sorry, was that your question? Are we looking at oil?
Yeah, no, I was just, because you didn't specifically mention oil, I was a bit worried about that, because it is, because I recognize that it's one of the best ones to kind of get, and there probably aren't that many homes anymore with oil, but still. So the other question I had is regarding the debt staying with the home, and I wonder if that, I wonder if you spoke with real estate agents about that, because I think it's a great program, and we don't want them lobbying against this, because they think it might be a turnoff when somebody goes to sell their home.
I was hoping Julie was going to raise her hand. Through you, Mr. Chair. So no, we haven't spoken to any realtors. I mean, the homeowner can put this as a condition on sale of their home, where they have the option where they could pay off the lien before the homeowner, the new homeowner, the buyer, takes it over. So, I mean, it's really largely up to the homeowner. Maybe it is worthwhile to speak to some of the realtors so they understand it. Closely related is we also need to speak to financial institutions, because in Toronto, during their program, some of the mortgage lenders expressed concerns because ours is a priority lien. So we will be providing documentation with participating financial institutions ahead of time so we can address any potential problems proactively.
I really, really recommend you do that, because that was one of the problems at the beginning with the MicroFIT program, when they were developing the MicroFIT program for solar state agencies, as well as financial institutions concerns regarding that. And there was major confusion. So I think that if we get ahead of that, then we won't find that we'll have problems later on. Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just to add to what Dave said, and thank you, that's a really good question. We did recognize when we spoke with Toronto that the LIC on the property, the institutions, financial institutions did have an issue, but since that time, FCM as well as CMHC has worked with the major corporations to alleviate their concerns, and these seems to have been resolved. So as we move forward, certainly through ours, we will be still reaching out to those financial institutions, but we're in a really better place than when Toronto was launching their program.
Any more questions, Councillor Doherty? Okay. Before we go to a second round of questions, I have a question. Has to do with the usage in the report of the word efficiency. It wasn't clear to me at all times that we're talking about energy efficiency, because there's also, especially when you're doing it home by home and the analysis by, when the energy audit is done, because there's the variable energy efficiency and there's the variable of cost efficiency. Is that calculated in the recommendations of what work is recommended? Is cost efficiency taken into account? Yes, go ahead.
So within the EnerGuide audit, no, it is not. What you see is energy efficiency and GHG, but not cost. The cost effectiveness would be in part of discussion with the energy coach and with the contractors providing quotes. So that's one of the main value added that we hope to have that coach provide, so the homeowner can make that most cost effective decision. What we're doing with this program design and within the 115 or so pages is that we already know on principle, based on their heating and building envelope, what will be the most cost effective, and then see where their house fits in. So we will be able to equip that homeowner to make that cost effective decision. But it's not in the EnerGuide audit report per se.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It seems to be very important for the success of the program, is to have it as cost effective for the homeowner as possible. All right, we'll go to a second round of questions. I saw Councillor Osterhoff's hand. You can go first. Remember, if you're making a comment, Councillor, wait till we get to the business item and it's on the floor. If you're making a comment, that is.
Question. Was there a maximum available per residential budget?
Go ahead, Mr. Roy.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we are recommending to use the same types of best practices that other communities have done, and that is up to 10% of the property value. We are recommending a maximum of $40,000. I think Toronto has included $75,000, but that's because 10% of the home value in Toronto is way above $40,000. So those are the maximums we're suggesting. We recognize that this is an additional debt burden, so we feel those caps still make it, we'll keep it within reasonable parameters.
Okay. But we only have 15 million available for our city.
Three, Mr. Chair. Yes, that's correct. So the 15 million would be, it's actually $12.5 million in loans, and that's assuming $25,000 loan per home for 500 homes. The average could be much lower, particularly with the incentives we're offering and now the announcement of the federal incentives coming. You know, the payback and interest rates will be better if the loan is lower, but if somebody's doing some major retrofits to their building envelope, their heating system, their hot water system, it could get high. So I think overall, if we could do 500 retrofits during the 4 years, that would be deemed a success, particularly if it's a rising number of retrofits we're achieving each year.
Okay, my only comments is quickly, I'm a bit of a numbers guy. That seems really low. 500. I would think that you're going to accomplish that very, very quickly. But that's just thinking quickly, and we can talk about it later. That's really low.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other side of that, Councillor, would be that if we sell out, so to speak, of all the grant and loan money, and then the program is clearly a success, and then we could look at maybe an extension, or maybe it would come because you'd be able to point to that success.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go to the next councillor. So Councillor Neal, second round of questions.
I believe I saw Mr. Rowade's hand up, so perhaps he wanted to speak to the previous question.
Sure, Mr. Rowade, did you have anything to say about that last point?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, yes, I did. Sorry. If I could have slide number 20, I should clarify those 500 homes are only using the LIC mechanism. We actually, in working with the utilities and the local financial institutions, we are hoping that that third-party financing will make up another 150 to 300 retrofits. We're just not including that in our budget because it's FCM. But overall, you know, if this table is right, we will have achieved 800. We have looked at more aggressive ramp up, but just to put it in perspective, in 13 years of retrofits in Kingston, the last 13 years, the average number of retrofits achieved each year is about 350.
Okay, thanks. That's good information.
Councillor Neal.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I live in some of the war housing from the 40s in Kings Court, as our colleague Councillor Holland does as well. So a quick question. First of all, the LIC, I know, is to pay back that initial grant that's given under the LIC program. Is that total LIC revenue totally spoken for over the 20 years? Or is there any window for potentially having reserves out of that? I see a puzzled look. Perhaps I didn't ask the question right. So.
I'm not sure I understand the
Yeah.
reserve you're speaking of. Sorry.
Maybe you could say it a different way, Councillor.
Yeah. The LIC typically, when it's done outside of the FCM granting program, is a loan to the property owner from the municipality, and it's set up either 10 or 20 years to pay for that loan through the stipend being added every year to your taxes. Is that total amount that's anticipated going towards the grants that we receive from FCM? Or is there going to be any surplus? I think I saw Julie raise her hand there. So
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to answer your question. I think I understand what you mean. So we would be applying to FCM for grants as well as the loans. So the loans would be where it's going to be used for the LIC. And we've looked at 10 to 20 years, and they would be repaid back to the city, like the 20% portion, as well as the FCM has the loan portion. And then we have the grant portion as well, which would then be used for incentives or to pay for the energy audits, etc. But the loan itself would be on the LIC. Does that answer your question?
yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
My other question, and this would apply to a whole lot of houses in the Kingsford area, but I can see, for instance, the audit coming back telling me that I need to replace some windows and I need a fair bit of insulation. And that, I appreciate, would be the most cost-effective approach. I would love to have a solar panel on my sunny roof, front roof. Is there, if the audit comes back with a recommendation for windows and insulation, is there an opportunity for me to look at a MicroFIT if it works? And the reason I'm asking is, several years ago, I went to Portland, Oregon, and they had a brilliant program where this city put out a call for tenders and got very low prices on both the installation and the purchase of solar panels. And is any of this, or is there potential for this to be an approach that the city could do? That would be some administrative costs, but could be full recovery, because quite frankly, I'd be happy to spend money on some green panels. Is that a potential within this project?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So renewable energy technologies are eligible, and ultimately, while the EnerGuide audits at getting that gigajoule use down to low as possible, it's really up to the homeowner what their budget is. And they may put solar on if it fits their budget, and that would reduce their purchase electricity. The thing with solar, it won't reduce greenhouse gases as much if it's used for electricity. Our grid is fairly green. However, having said that, if somebody was getting off natural gas to an electric furnace, so then their cheap natural gas use goes down, but their more expensive electricity goes up. Solar makes a lot of sense there, because that can lower their electricity costs back down again. And you're right. I mean, there's a very good payback on solar now. The cost per kilowatt hours come way down. So it'll really be on a house by house basis and up to the homeowner's budget. But renewable energy technologies are eligible.
But if a resident wanted to go over and above what the audit was recommending and pay for it in full, is there any chance of getting a more reasonable installation and purchase price on panels to be part of that of the city making those recommendations? Like, will we go out and do a request for proposals price-wise for energy, green energy?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, there's a way to bring down the per unit cost. It is not our recommendation that the city consider playing that role. So the first part, there are a number of municipalities that are looking at working with industry associations to get group rates because there's so many of us proposing these programs. I believe it's only Windsor that is considering in their program to actually take that on. That is not our recommended approach at this time.
Mr. Hugenmoss.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and to follow up, and thanks, Dave and Councillor Neal. So, yeah, I appreciate what the councillor is asking, and doing this doesn't stop the city from pursuing that opportunity. But the program right now is set up as looking at what can we do right now in response to council's goals. Go to FCM, apply for this money for the loans and the grants. It's great. With the work that Julie and Dave and the whole community is doing right now with the climate leadership plan, there will need to be lots of different things to be done across the community in order to reach council's goals, the city's goals, the community's goals on GHG reduction. So absolutely, as the technologies get better and solar and everything else, we need to be flexible. But for tonight, we're not proposing that we start that process as well. And I don't think anybody on this meeting would say that for the next 4 years, this will go exactly how it's planned and there'll be no new technology and nothing like that. I don't think anybody would be saying that tonight, but I appreciate what Dave's saying. I think we have to focus on how the program can be set up right now and then remain flexible to implement other things, whether it's through this or through something else.
I appreciate that. So what you're saying is this program, which I think is brilliant, it's great, but we can also look for future motions that may give a nudge to staff to do, to expand on this.
Absolutely. And I would hope also that through the work that we're doing with the leadership plan and with the community, that whether it needs to be a motion of council or not, it can be driven by the staff and the community to find new ways to deal with things as these opportunities come about. But as you can see, this team is ready to do that because the work that you're seeing tonight has been well thought out, well-based, and I think is something that can be really great as for all the comments so far for this community. Yeah, thanks, Councilor.
It's a great program. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You got it.
Any other questions for staff about the briefing? Okay, then we'll move to the business. Just one second while I get it up on my screen here. So business 7A, Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program, and there's a report, there's a recommendation with several clauses. So I guess we go to members of the committee. We've just had questions of the briefing, but there's actually it's in the agenda for questions to staff. So I'll go there now. Does anyone have questions to staff specifically about the recommendation? Before we actually move that said recommendation and go to members of the public.
I'm not sure it's really a question, and we touched on it a little bit already. Councillor Neal mentioned the Kings Court area, and of course, the area that I represent. So I'm quite interested because I know speaking with Utilities Kingston staff who work in the area of sustainability a while back. I was told that we've done some sort of heat mapping of the city for like high energy costs. And so I was just wondering how that might be incorporated in the future and as far as sort of incentives or promotion. Are we going to really, Mr. Rowood mentioned that with propane oil, that would be something that makes a lot of sense, but just wondering if certain neighborhoods would be targeted.
Answer that.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, but I'll certainly have Dave. And I think there's a slide that we could call up with the hot market. And I don't know if when you looked at the chart, there's that hot market and the warm market and the market segments and how we would target probably as we launch. So Dave, if you have that slide and you wanted to go over that, that would be a really good opportunity to highlight how we would target as we launch this program.
Mr. Rowade, are you unmuted?
Oh, sorry. Can I get the last slide of the deck, slide 37? I want to make sure I address Councillor Holland's question. So the short answer is yes, we are targeting households with a higher energy cost burden. So that is households that are, sorry, the very last slide of the whole deck, slide 37. Those are households that are paying double the national median on their utility bills in relation to their household income. And we have mapped that out. So this map shows the percentage of the census tract with that high energy cost burden, so double the national average. And I believe Kings Court is that blue segment in the middle that's at 42.8. So that's roughly 43% of that census tract has a high energy cost burden. They're paying twice as much of their income on energy costs. Now that's a relation of both their household income being low and their energy consumption. So because we have some of the market intel, not just this, but the previous slide, and now if I could get slide 23, which is an upside down pyramid, Julia had referred to, we did very detailed market analysis on where the hot markets and warm markets are. And the hottest market is also who has some of the highest energy costs, and that's in that hot and warm market. The hot market is all the oil users. They're spending up to $4,000 a winter season on heating alone. The warm market includes the oldest natural gas and electric homes. The electric homes are also spending $3,000 to $4,000 a year on utility costs when the average is only around $2,000, $2,100. So that is very much centered in this. Even though we know this is a GHG driven program, we know from years of public dialogue, political discourse and debate on energy, people need energy relief. This program is designed to do both, reduce emissions while also giving utility cost relief.
Thanks. Yeah, that's helpful.
And I take it from Mr. Rowade, from your answer that indirectly you've stated that specific neighborhoods aren't targeted per se, but specific types of homes, the hot market type homes, are indeed targeted.
That's correct. There's some homes that will have opportunities to cut their utility bills in half. Oil is higher carbon content. You can reduce 90% of the emissions from those homes. Propane would be more like 30 to 40%. Natural gas is challenging because it is a cheaper fuel. If the homeowner is inclined, there are other opportunities, but the improvements are more in the 15 to 25% range. So this program is technology agnostic, fuel agnostic, but we recognize it is GHG driven. So we're going to try to optimize those homes with our analysis, as well as factoring in the utility issue I spoke to.
Thank you. I'm tempted to ask you a question about how do heritage windows on heritage homes fit into the whole energy picture, but I'm not going to go there because that can be very time consuming. Any other questions about the recommendations before we move in seconded? And we would go to members of the public if there were any in attendance, but I'm checking the board and there aren't any, it seems. But before we move in second to the recommendation, any last questions? Okay, so then I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Neal. Second by Councillor Straub. Just give me a second to get it up on the screen here. I keep going back and forth between. There we go. So the recommendation, and I will read it quickly. I apologize if I slur any words, just let me know, I can slow down. So the recommendation that the EITP committee recommended council the following: that council receives the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program rationale and design study attached as Exhibit A to report number EITP 21-007, required as a prerequisite to being eligible for applying to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Community Energy Financing Program. And that council direct staff to include the related funding for the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program in the draft 2021, that's this year, capital budget. And that council direct staff to prepare a grant and loan application to the FCM Community Energy Financing Program for funding the setup and launch phase and the operations of the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program as outlined in the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program rationale and design study attached as Exhibit A to report number EITP 21-007, subject to approval of the city's 2021 budget, and that the CAO or designate be delegated the authority to sign applications for the FCM Community Energy Financing Program, and that the bylaw to authorize the undertaking of energy efficiency and water conservation works on private residential property as local improvements under the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program (CURB), attached as Exhibit B to report number EITP 21-007, be presented to council for the first and second reading, as passing the bylaw is a prerequisite to being eligible for applying to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Community Energy Financing Program, and that staff report back to EITP in Q3 2021, that's this year, following notification from FCM on the city's funding application with the final program details, including the results of additional stakeholder consultation and a recommendation regarding the implementation of the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program. That's the recommendation with 6 clauses. It's on the floor. Would anyone wish to speak? Sorry, we are seeing the screen, one sec. Would anyone wish to speak? All right, well, I'll get the ball rolling. I'll just give my comments. Mr. Vice Chair, if you don't mind taking the chair for a minute.
Happy to, and I recognize you.
Okay, so the first thing I did when processing the information in front of us was try to sort of put it in, how does it all fit into everything else? You know, lots of things come at us claiming to be green. Lots of things come at us from other levels of government, and you know, you need to sort of know where we stand and whether or not in the end this is helpful. We could just assume that it is because it's coming from staff that's put a lot of work into it, but we need to do a little bit of analysis of our own. And in my estimation, what we've got here is essentially I think that Mr. Hugenboss kind of touched on this when he spoke. This is an opportunity in front of us from FCM with a grant and loan program with specifics and literature and everything already up and running with federal money. That's just basically begging for us to participate. And it does require some work on this as part of staff, as staff is willing to do. And it does require the various moving parts to all fit together, and it requires, like they said, the energy coach and the utilities involvement, and requires votes of council for budget considerations and so on. But to me, as I read through, it can be nothing but a positive in my view. However, the questions from the committee seem to be, a lot of them, focused on cost effectiveness, which is not only a benefit to the individual constituent, as is obvious to all of us, especially in some of these older, less efficient homes, and neighborhoods, as Councillor Holland mentioned, that may not be, you know, socioeconomically at the top of the scale. They definitely need energy relief, and they definitely need cost effectiveness. It's going to be the only thing driving their decision making most of the time. So that piece, that cost effectiveness piece, is key to the success of this program in my mind, in really any retrofit program, I believe, because not everybody's made of money, and we've got to get away from the initiatives that really only benefit those to do it, and who do it basically, you know, the people that buy a Tesla so they can tell their friends that they have a Tesla. That's not going to be an effective program if that's what this program ends up being. Something that you can just say to your neighbors, oh yeah, we did the home retrofit program, it was great, look how great we are. It needs to actually be cost effective, it needs to save you money, and it needs to reduce greenhouse gases in reality. So I believe this program has all of those elements. I'm a very practical person, and so as the reports come back, that's the way I'm going to be evaluating it. It will have the best, whatever has the best bang for its buck is going to be what sells and what works and what gets us to sell out of our grant and loan money. So I'm hoping that it is very successful, and that, as Councillor Straw hinted, that we might actually run out of faults for this. That's happened with other green initiatives in the past, and I always take that as a positive. So I've got great hopes for this plan, and I'm planning to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, and I return the chair.
Thanks. Anyone else wish to speak to the recommendation? Okay, well, I guess we did a lot of our talking in our questions, and we've covered all the bases, so I guess I'll call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation? All those opposed? And that passes unanimously. Well done. We'll move on to the next item. There's a briefing as well. So that's the Green Standard Community Improvement Plan update. And I guess we've got the same staff. Ms. Saltikeen, do you want to introduce the item?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually going to start with the first half of the presentation, and then I will hand it over to Dave. So thank you. Tonight we're going to present now on the proposed Green Standard Community Improvement Plan. What we're going to do is provide you an update of the progress we've made to date in the development of the Green Standard CIP. And there is a request before the committee tonight, a recommendation with respect to the official plan. So the presentation will speak to the strategic directions and the guidance on the process, why we're here before you tonight. The Green Standard CIP overview and the need for an official plan amendment, any of the stakeholder consultation that we have been doing over the last year, considering options for the incentives, why we need better buildings, and then we will lay out our next steps as we go forward. Next slide, please. So we had the strategic direction on the CIP development from Council through the strategic plan. And through that, there's direction through the provincial policy statement and the Planning Act, and then the evolving changes to the Ontario Building Code, as they certainly through the Ontario Building Code and the Canadian Building Code, the extent to building to green has been changing over the years, as we anticipate as we go forward to 2030 as well. Next slide. So we've just highlighted here the climate leadership that we were directed to develop and promote the incentives for residents to reduce their energy use. And what we just heard before you was the Kingston Home Energy Retrofit Program. And now we are as well developing a new build net zero policy in the incentive program through the CIP model that was directed by Council. And certainly over the last year, we've done a lot of work on the development of the program itself, and which we will be laying out tonight. Next slide. So as indicated, there is direction and policy direction through the Provincial Planning Act and the Building Code. The Planning Act does allow for a CIP to address public interest need, which includes net zero development. The National Building Code of Canada addresses this, and the continuous improvement, as I spoke to earlier, on the Ontario Building Code regarding energy efficiency requirements. So the policy structures there, we have the requirement, we have the CIP structured through the Planning Act as well as through the official plan. So we are allowed to proceed in developing this CIP. Next slide. So looking at the building our climate leadership and the Green Standard CIP, we wanted to ensure that we are enabling a standard that will aim at stimulate construction of new residential commercial buildings to a high efficiency use. It will include financial incentives, and that's where we will be over the next number of months as we continue to develop this program, look at the financial incentives to help cover the increased cost of building to higher performance level. And you'll hear from us as well that there is a fine line as to what that incentive will look like. And we've done a lot of research on that to date, and which we'll be bringing forth when we bring the final Green Standard before the committee later this year. And finally, the program would be voluntary when we proceed with the CIP, and it would be similar to how the brownfield CIP works. There's voluntary, there would be the incentives, and we would offer a number of programs that we would certainly be evaluating and bring forward to the committee in the future. The ask, next slide, please. The ask that we are requesting of the committee tonight is recommending that they direct staff to amend the official plan. The current policies within the official plan and Schedule 10 limit community improvement areas to within the urban boundary. And certainly with this Green Standard CIP, we want to ensure that it's applicable throughout the entire municipality. So we are requesting that we amend the OP to permit this Green Standard project area. So through the development of the OPA, we would be working with staff to not only amend the official plan, but to look at how the program would roll out. And at the same time, once the official plan is approved, would bring forward the program for consideration EITP. And I will now pass it over to Dave on the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. So regarding stakeholder input to date, earlier in 2020, we held an in-person net zero forum for developers, home builders, real estate financiers, and contractors. It was very well attended. The proceedings were posted on the Get Involved Kingston page. We also conducted a virtual public meeting more recently in November, as well as research on other green development incentive programs, particularly in Ontario. The provincial codes are very different, say in BC or Nova Scotia. So we did try to look at best practices within Ontario. However, we do recognize additional consultation is necessary with developers and home builders regarding effective incentivization. As you see in the report, Hamilton's numbers have been underwhelming by their own conclusion for a variety of reasons. If we can go to the next slide, we'll look at some of the ways to build effective incentivization. So fortunately, there's a number of existing building performance rating programs that are suitable for new construction. Some of them are quite well known, such as the EnerGuide rating system and the Lic Canada rating system. Others are more popular in Europe and are only recently coming to Canada, such as Passive House and Built Green. The important thing here is that, as you can see by the middle diagram, they can be related back to energy use and in some cases emissions. However, the Green Standard CIP will also address, in addition to energy and emissions, it can address air quality, water efficiency, and waste management. If I could get the next slide, please. So staff are in the midst of a process where we're trying to determine the appropriate balance between resourcing the incentive with public monies and adequately incentivizing the development community to voluntarily build to these higher standards. This process includes several variables as listed on this slide, because they affect the type of incentive, the timing of incentive, and the quantum of the incentives. So while there are a number of incentives that are being explored by staff and we're assessing the different and innovative approaches, we need to look at their level of influence in encouraging the developers and builders to participate in the program, as well as the different levels of cost of the municipality to implement them. This is what we'll be reporting back later in the year. It's also to consider the appropriate mix of incentives for the different types of buildings and the owners. Sometimes you will have a developer that may build a building, but they won't own it, so they won't benefit on the energy savings. So we're trying to look at a broad suite and come up with the best formula for all different cases that would be applicable to the CIP. Next slide, please. This line graph is a conceptual graph. So the numbers aren't specific to evidence. It's more the conceptual approach that's outlined in the report before you. And it's really speaking to that the incremental capital cost, that is the cost to go above what is required by law in the building code, is going to come down as the building code becomes more strict on energy performance. And so as the building code moves towards getting to net zero energy, thought to be in between 2030 and 2035, this incentive program should be phased out if that's main focus. The incremental capital cost will be zero when it's required by law. So this is really just a concept of why the incentive should be the greatest over the next 5 or 6 or 7 years when the incremental costs are still somewhat high with the lower OBC levels. Next slide, please. The last few slides are really speaking to why we need the better buildings in the first place. I'm only going to spend a few minutes or a few moments on each of these points. If I could have the next slide, please. The greenhouse gas emissions from buildings were before you last year when we brought the community emissions inventory. And in that report, we showed you that 43%, nearly half of emissions in this community come from buildings. So that's separated into the industrial, commercial, institutional sector at 29% and low-rise residential buildings at 14%. And in terms of the amount of money spent on energy in these two sectors, it was over $300 million. So the new buildings that are being constructed in the future, we have an opportunity to lower that energy cost burden right from design. Next slide, please. This is a really important point, one that's been debated politically at the provincial level. It's very much in the public mind share, because the fact is energy prices have outstripped the inflation rate over the last 20 years. I should point out that this consumer price index slide, the energy bundle does also include gasoline and diesel, but electricity has increased greatly in the price per kilowatt hour over this period of time. So recognizing that this trend will likely continue, again, we can influence the type of building and the building costs that those owners and users will be burdened with. Next slide, please. Another compelling reason that buildings will need to perform differently in the future is based on a trend that's been happening over the last 50 years and is expected to continue over the next 50 years. And that is a decrease in the heating days, which you see on your heating bills, the number of days you're likely going to need to turn on your furnace, and an increase in the cooling days for those of us who have air conditioning. It's those extreme hot days where we're likely going to need to turn on our air conditioning. Interestingly, a building built to code has excess heating capacity today and insufficient cooling capacity. This is something really important to address with the green standard. We have the ability to address that, to accommodate those changing things over time, and the increase in cooling days has an impact on health, as we saw in Quebec and Montreal with a heat wave a couple years ago. So enabling that capacity for cooling to increase is an important factor we can achieve with the CIP. So the next slide speaks to a number of broader benefits of net zero buildings. If I could have the next slide up, please. I'm not going to speak to each one of these. Some I've already touched upon, but it's not just about money. It's not just about energy and emissions. There are health and comfort levels. The important implicit point here is that we know how to build to achieve these benefits and advantages over the 20th century development approach, and municipalities are in a great position to encourage
Dave, if you can hear us, I don't know if I can hear you. I don't think other members of council can hear you either. Sorry.
No, we've lost you.
Yeah. Julie, are you there? Could you start taking over and see if I can reach out to Dave?
I certainly can. So I believe were you on the last slide, I believe, the next steps? Slide 17, please.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I think he
We
was
must have rural broadband. That's why we want to fix it.
Okay, so I'll just finish off. I believe we were on the last slide when his internet dropped. He just texted me and that's what happened. So our next steps are Q1, Q2. We are looking for direction to amend the official plan, as I indicated, for citywide CIP application. And staff will continue to consult with developers, home builders to finalize the details of the Green Standard CIP, which would include that incentivizing and the different programs that we could bring forward for consideration. And then we anticipate by Q2, Q3 2021 that we'll be bringing back that final report. The official plan amendment would be approved, and we'd bring back the final report to the committee for consideration. And I believe that's the last slide. And we're available for questions.
Great. Thank you for that. And I see Dave is back. So we go into members of the committee for questions about the briefing. And then after that, we will go through the same process as we did the previous item. Councillor Stratford first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's, again, an excellent submission and presentation. Very, very interesting. I would obviously support. What's the feedback? I missed that. Maybe the engagement. What did you gain much from that? Also with building inspection departments and all that. Obviously, this was something that was well received. Or is there a concern about price increases?
through me, Mr. Chair. So
Right.
Sorry, go ahead, Julie.
I was going to start off and let Dave continue, Mr. Chair. So we had the forum in, I believe it was last March, just before the pandemic, and then we had our Get Involved page. We launched that in November, and we had a virtual public meeting at that time. We did have a number of home builders and developers attend the online forum, and a lot of the questions are around how were we going to incentivize. Speaking to what Dave was talking about, that fine line of how do we get them to build to the net zero, and what is the incentivize that would get them to do it. So they had a lot of questions around that. So that's what we will be working on over the next number of months, is to look at that programming and how do we incentivize, and what are those commitments that we could look at.
And from a building inspection, I guess that's our own authorities and professional input. I guess was this something that was complicated? Is it difficult to change a building code? Is that a local thing, or is it a provincial building code? I know electrical code, but not a building code. How do you address that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So it's the Ontario Building Code, and they seem to amend the building code every 4 years to increase the net zero requirements or building to green. They look at accessibility, so they do bring forth new changes in every few years. Certainly with the the building department. We've been working with them and consulting with them. To set the program or to set what net zero is and the different builds as to, you know, net zero or LEED, et cetera. That was the easy component of looking at and establishing what the program may look like and the certifications that would be required. But it's really the incentivizing that we need to sit down now and really understand and to bring back to the committee for consideration.
Yeah, I would look forward to seeing that. I mean, a good builder, I mean, is also going to recognize there's incredible incentives just on, there's a return on your investment as well. But you know, I think the time is now to make that headway and that people can receive a better product. Good, I think it's fantastic. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to ask questions about the briefing? Councillor Olsenic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a question to staff. Thanks so much for your presentation. On page 162, it talks about the other cities in Ontario that have a program like this. So Vaughan, Brampton, Richmond Hill, and Halton Hills. And then I know that you also mentioned Toronto and Hamilton. Are those basically the only cities in Ontario that do have a program? And I think you mentioned that Hamilton, you know, hasn't had very much uptake. Is that the same thing then for Vaughan, Brampton, Richmond Hill, and Halton? It's just all very minimal in uptake of a program like this?
For you, Mr. Chair, and I'll leave it to Dave to add as well. So certainly the Green Standard CIP that we are developing would be the first in Ontario. There isn't a CIP for Green Standard at this time. The Toronto incentive is through their development charges, and the one in Hamilton, they have the incentives as well for development, but they haven't been, hasn't been that much uptake. The other municipalities that we spoke to, they have green standards where developers, they have a checklist when people come in for building permits and they have that checklist, but they don't have the incentives to it. So from our research, certainly in Ontario, it's Toronto and Hamilton. And like I said, and Dave may add, that really hasn't been that uptake as to being able to apply and develop these net zero buildings.
I would add that while Toronto is probably the more successful program, I think many people would agree that's somewhat of a unique market, or only one of 2 or 3 of that size and of that magnitude where you can attract investors and developers for a program. Hamilton has struggled much more. Toronto and Hamilton are actually the only ones in Ontario currently with financial incentives. As Julie was alluding to, the other ones really only have performance metrics, and they encourage them. They provide education and guidance, but no incentives. And the Canadian Green Building Council came out with a report that showed currently the return on investment, it's okay for public sector. That's why you have universities, social housing, and municipalities building these buildings. Not a lot of private sector buildings. The return isn't that great. Now is the time for incentivization. We just have to find the right ones.
Great, thank you. When I was on the planning committee back in 2006 to 2010, that's when I think it went, well, that's when Woodhaven, right, was coming online. And I remember at planning committee, we were always, like, every new subdivision that came up, we were always asking the developers if they could make the roof solar ready. I remember always we were questioning, you know, how come you have the streets with the houses facing east-west? Like, shouldn't they be facing north-south so that your roof facing south can have solar panels? And you know, I could have sworn that we were able to get a developer to build, like, I don't know if it was just one street or if it was an entire subdivision, and if so, if that was Woodhaven or not, but to have the roofs solar ready. But maybe that wasn't the case, or maybe back then, because it was 10 years ago, you know, one level of government actually provided incentives. Do you remember any of that? Or maybe it was just we were always asking, but never making headway, and then we kind of gave up asking for that at every single meeting. Do you remember, do you recall anything, especially Julie or Ms. Salter-Keen, you were in the department back then, eh? Do you remember?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't remember that, but certainly we've been working with planning department on our climate leadership plan, because that's one of the action items that we can look at, policies for the community to be able to implement and use. So Dave and I actually have a couple meetings coming up with the planning department to look at what we can do moving forward with the zoning bylaw, nothing to do with the CIP green standard or with, you know, the retrofit, but what policies can we look at to encourage and to ensure that developments in the future could be more green.
And we're going to go to you, Mr. Hugenboss. Just want to remind members of the committee that there's all kinds of ways to skin the green cat. But, we're really only talking about this particular green standard CIP tonight. Mr. Hugenboss.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chair. And wasn't going to put it that way, however, I was going to say that I asked these types of questions, Councillor Osanik, to the team. What about this? What about that? And what we're looking at right now, and it's not not a recommendation tonight to approve the CIP, the Green Standard CIP, but what it does is it puts that framework in place after we get the official plan change to include all of the city, including the rural, so that different programs could happen. So if it's the will of council, staff, the community to say, can we do this for development, land development, or can we do this for these types of buildings, this type of incentive program, those programs can be put in, they can be, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave and Julie, but they can be altered or changed or amended under that CIP umbrella framework. So those types of things and whatever else, like we were talking about earlier, things that we can't think of right now that could be coming up, then we have the framework in place to be able to put those programs in. So it is relative to the program tonight, but something more specific down the line.
Got it. All right. Thank you very much.
Councillor Neal, you're up next.
Thank you. And I'll try not to wander into that space that we were just recommended not to, but I know that the official plan has a lot of recommendations and, in my mind, not enough shells that are more binding for development. I'm thinking of affordable housing, for instance. For decades, we've had a target, I think it's 15%, it may be higher. We've yet to have a developer that's actually met that target. So I guess my only concern with the recommended CIP before us tonight is that if all we have is targets, and I appreciate that we're trying to incentivize it, but are there any things that are more low-hanging fruit that we could make a shall within the official plan? I know at planning, and we always bring up, for instance, making sure that new builds have the ability to install electric chargers for EVs. And usually we get compliance, but is there anything that we could put a shall before instead of just recommending it?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Certainly, as Mr. Hugenboss said, what we'll be putting together is the framework. The policy of the official plan is there to ensure that we can bring forth a CIP. So what's in that CIP would be important. But the requirement for the amendment to the official plan is really to ensure the entire municipality. So the framework, the policy to develop the CIP is there. It's when we come back with the CIP, we can look at what you said. Can we include EV chargers as one of the components to incentivize developers to build? So certainly we can look at that as we develop the program and when we bring it back for the committee's consideration.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the committee? I have a question. So this CIP and I'm going to use, for the focus of my question, I'm going to use an example. So contaminated waterfront land in Kingston's Inner Harbor. Just this is a theoretical, but using a specific spot so that you can frame it in your minds where I'm going with this question. So contaminated waterfront land where there's a development proposal. And now we perhaps might have a wording in the OP with Green Standard CIP. This is in the future if this passes. How would those two things interact? The brownfields incentives and any potential CIP incentives, would they be completely separate? Could they possibly multiply each other or add to each other in a beneficial way? Have staff thought about this? Because Kingston is also known for its preponderance of contaminated lands.
So I'll start. I'm just waiting for my video, but I'll start. There we go, Councillor Stroud. So yeah, that's also something that we have talked about, and it is something that we are working to generate some ideas. But as you know, with the significant files in brownfields, there has been a need to amend and revise on those unique cases. So there is a potential that if we are having significant development on a brownfield site, that we'd also want it to be net zero. Absolutely. The program right now is just in its stage of consultation and looking. That's good feedback, and it's good to hear this from the committee. But it may be something that needs to be dealt with on those one-by-one basis. When there might need to be some revisions or changes to a specific project area, such as some recent large-scale brownfields. Some brownfields don't have a significant scale, if you will, and have a relatively straightforward, shorter payback period, and fits into the program quite well. Whereas there are other ones, there have been made to have specific changes, and that could be the case for something that could be targeted as a net zero development as well as brownfield funding, and that's part of all the incentives. I will go back to one of the things that I think Dave said before he got cut off by his internet problems there on his presentation, was that over time the building codes are looking like they'll be changing. So there may only be a small period of time where we're overlapping. We also have done very well with our brownfields program and redeveloped many sites. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily something that this whole program has to be geared to address that one particular issue, but it's very real that you brought up. But there might be, as you said, only a limited amount of time that it could be relevant.
So I'm taking from your answer then that it would be possible to have multiple types of incentives on one site. That, but if that were the case, that would be a complex site to begin with that would need multiple incentives to even be possible. I guess that's sort of what I'm hearing.
Yes.
And also possibly this might add a layer of complexity to a project. Applying for this kind of CIP might make a project more complex, I guess is the other aspect of your answer. Is that correct?
Well, no doubt net zero development does make things more complex. I don't mean it's not possible. It's a higher level of building code. It exceeds building code, and it uses different technology that Dave and Julie, but especially Dave, can speak better than I can. But yes, a net zero development is more complex than the current building code. You're on mute there, Dave.
If I could add, Mr. Chair, to add to Peter's point, there are some innovative ways that we can achieve, say, for example, making a brownfield site into a net zero building. I'll very quickly outline two. One of them, FCM has a separate funding that for some reason is only available to brownfield sites, and that's for it to have renewable energy generation on site. So right now, municipalities can't apply just for a renewable energy project unless it's on a brownfield site. So we could potentially be a funding partner. We could apply on behalf of the project and then have the flow through money, making sure it uses the CIP so it's not bonusing. Another really creative way is coming up from the private sector. There's 4 different geotechnical companies and Enbridge Gas who are now offering a geothermal, where they will cover all the capital costs for the underground piping, which is 60 to 80% of the cost. The developer only needs to put in the heat pump, make sure the building envelope is tight. So using that model, and maybe again, we're just trying to get the players at the table, we can lower the costs for that developer after they've spent all the money on cleaning up, maybe using our brownfield CIP, they could use other models to achieve the net zero.
Your last intriguing thing that you brought up there generated another question. So you're saying that Enbridge and others are, as an incentive of their own in the private sector, presumably for the purpose of market development of these alternative energies, are offering heavy incentives to install geothermal for some of these large multi-units. And we also have what the first part of your question is, this FCM grant, similar to what we just talked about, specifically for brownfield sites for net zero development. And would that fit? So the question is, would that fit into this Green Standard CIP, or would this be yet another initiative?
Yes, it could fit into the CIP, absolutely.
Okay. That's all my questions. Anyone else? All right. So I guess that's it for the briefing questions. So we now go to the business item, which is 7B. Here, a sec. There's always a digital delay because of having everything on the computer. Right, so 7B is a report which was included in the package, and a recommendation with 2 clauses and an introductory clause. So before we move and seconded it, we would normally go to members of the committee for questions on the recommendation, and then to members of the public, who again, I see there aren't any in attendance. So is any questions about the recommendation in front of us? Is what we would be recommending to council. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Holland. The DITP recommend to council the following. Council directs staff to amend the OP to permit a green standard community improvement plan and project area within the entire municipality, and that staff report back to ITP with the proposed green standard community improvement plan and CIP bylaw upon the approval of the official plan amendment. So first the official plan amendment, and then the report back with a proposed plan for the green standard CIP. So there is a chronology to it, and it's on the floor. So anyone can speak, offer amendments, whatever other procedural things you might want to do. When we're done with that, I'll be calling the question. Who wishes to speak? All right, well, again, just so that we don't walk away without any thoughts on this, I might speak to it, Mr. Vice Chair.
And I recognize you.
Thank you. Well, the Vice Chair said it very well in one of his questions. There's been, and Councillor Sanik also spoke to this. Many times have municipalities wanted to incentivize private developers to do this kind of thing, whether through wording that we put into our documents, or through questions at the planning committee, like Councillor Sanik was saying, repeatedly asking for certain things from developers when they come before us. There's been probably many times in strategic planning over the last several terms of council since green initiatives became a thing that it's been put into strategic planning. There's been probably a lot more talk than action if you're just doing the measurables of how many projects have been completed with this new kind of thinking. To me, my interpretation of this, what's in front of us tonight, is using for the first time the CIP language in the OP for this purpose, tied to actual incentives, the same way that a brownfields works, in the sense that you put you defer the spending for the developer, allowing them to put the money in to the extra cost of implementing what it is that you want. And I think it's worth a shot. But again, as Councillor Neal was saying, things of this nature have been tried before and failed. The uptake in other municipalities, as Mr. Royd was saying, has not been great. With the ways that they approached it in the report, it speaks to the way Toronto and Hamilton and some limited success, but not really. Nobody's tried this particular angle to this point. So it requires an amendment to the official plan, and again, official plan itself, the language in it is kind of like a framework by nature, and not something compelling like that, not something that can force a developer to do something necessarily, depending on how it's worded, which is why Councillor Neal was asking for the word shall to be put in, so that it wouldn't be something that you choose to do. It wouldn't be an option. It would be, mandatory. In my understanding of official plans, that's difficult to do effectively in the official plan language, because it needs to be flexible enough to allow the secondary plans to feed into it. So I'm not sure, I'm not a planner, but I suspect that part of the reason that that's not easily done is that it may be a lot more difficult than it sounds. That all being said, we got to start somewhere. I'm actually pretty skeptical about this one compared to the previous item, but that's only because of who we're dealing with and the track record of the large builders that we have here in Kingston. We know what motivates them, and so if we want them to do something, we have to give them strong financial incentive. That's the only thing that's going to alter their plans. So hopefully that's what is going to come back from the report. Hopefully it can be done in a way that doesn't break the bank, because otherwise it's not going to go anywhere either. We'll see what comes of it. It's a new year. Hope springs eternal. But we are all obligated to take a good look at it when it does come back, and to try to make it as effective as possible. I have all the faith in staff that it can be done, but I don't envy you having to do the work, because, like I said, this has been attempted in different forms many times. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I will support the recommendation, and I do wish staff good luck with the work. Thank you.
And I return the chair.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak to the recommendation? I guess everybody just wants to vote, so let's do that. I call the question. All those in favor? All opposed? And that seems to also have passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Good luck, staff. We're almost done the agenda. We'll go back to the last few pieces of the agenda. So, Madam Clerk, do we have any motions or notices of motion?
No, Mr. Chair, we do not.
Do we have any other business? The floor is open to any other business. Seeing none. Correspondence, I don't believe we had any on these items. Just a side note, on the correspondence and on the lack of attendance tonight from members of the public. I have noticed this trend with special meetings, and therefore I don't like holding special meetings when they can be avoided. I understand the reason for this one. Perhaps the next time we see these items, though, it could be at a regular meeting, would publish the agenda, the schedule that people know in advance. If we want to get public input, that seems to be the best way to do it. And on that note, our next meeting is a regular meeting of the ITP. It is Tuesday, February 9th, roughly, I think that's 29 days from now, roughly. And that's it. So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Neal, Councillor Osanek, all those in favor? All those opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Happy New Year, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow night.
Thanks, everybody.